Invite Mr. Cloves Benevides, the Undersecretary of Sustainability, Ministry of Transport, Brazil. I request you to kindly take a seat. May I now invite Savina Carluccio, the Executive Director, International Coalition for Sustainable Infrastructure, and the Global Chapter Lead of our report, particularly ICSI supported us in conducting the Global Infrastructure Resilience Survey. Savina, please kindly take a seat. May I now invite our lead coordinating author, Ede Ijaz, to kindly come up on the dais and take the seat. Let me now invite Anika from BCG. Again, BCG is our global partner in doing the pilot survey with the businesses, and the report came out with very interesting findings, which we will be sharing with all of you very shortly. Let me also take the opportunity to invite Mr. Eduardo Tavares from the National Secretary of Funds and Financial Instruments, Brazil. Please come on the dais, and thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you. So, first of all, a very good afternoon to all of you, and thank you very much for taking out time to join us today in this panel discussion. It's an absolute honor for me to welcome you all on the dais and moderate this session. As DG CDRI Amit mentioned in the very beginning about the first report, which we launched in 2023, which was all about building a very compelling narrative around what is resilient infrastructure, what is resilience dividend, why do we at all need to look at it, and then broadly talked about the pathways on how to kind of achieve resilience, infrastructure resilience, and capture resilience dividend. The next 2 years we started working on the how part of it. So we heard about the what in the first report, and in the second report we started looking at how part it. So now we understood what is resilient infrastructure, but how do we build them? What are the challenges? How do we finance it? What role the technology can play? What are the feedback that we receive from the people who are working on the ground, like the infrastructure professionals, the disaster risk management professionals, and all other relevant stakeholders working in the space of infrastructure resilience. We also heard about the role of private sector. So we also tried to reach out to the businesses and try to understand how businesses might get affected, what is needed. And then, of course, we also try to understand from these sectoral ministries, what does the planning ministry need to do? What does the ministry, each infrastructure ministry needs to do? So that is what this report is all about. This is the call for implementation, and this report is also actually aims to help people in implementing. And how does it do that? It provides policy recommendations, it provides rich analytics, it talks about frameworks, it talks about tools, and it provides more than 75 case studies from across the different parts of the world, which actually helps you to understand some of the concepts, some of the recommendations that we are making in this report. So with this background, maybe let me now move on to each of our speakers. This is a deep dive which will help you to understand what are the different messages that are emerging from this report. And my first question would be to Savina. Savina, I have two questions for you actually. The first is, you have been working in this space of resilient and sustainable infrastructure for several years. So according to you, how will this report contribute to the global discourse on disaster risk reduction and the adaptation agenda? So if you can kind of very quickly share your reflections on that. And the second part is more detailed one, because you have been the global lead for doing the infrastructure professional survey, which actually covered more than 3,000 professionals across 100 countries in the world. So what are the key learnings? What are the key findings that emerged from this survey? So if you can kind of share some more insights on that. So over to you, Savina.
Thank you very much, Ranjini. And I will start by saying congratulations. Congratulations to CDRI for publishing this. Congratulations to the team. And also I'd like to say that it was a pleasure to work with this team. Leading that survey was a learning experience for us, but it was a pleasure to work with such a great team of multidisciplinary experts. So thank you. So having said this, many of the things have been shared already, but just to consolidate on what I think this report will add, I think is important is that we are talking about the how. We're desperately needing to talk about the how, and this report does a great job. The other thing is that I think there is a message, but also there is something for everyone in this report. And it is actually so clearly and so rich, it's clear and rich at the same time. I'm not sure how you've achieved this, but you have managed to do this, and so great effort. So the Ministry of Finance, the people who are actually owning infrastructure, the professional, the private sector, you name it. So it's just amazing how you've managed to do this. So so that's one, and then. Give us a solid evidence base. This is so important. I think the numbers are super, important, because the decision makers are hanging on to the numbers, but then the specialists will want to know the rich detail that are behind the numbers. So great. Reframes resilience as an economic opportunity, which is also adding, I think, to the global discourse. It expands the lens to indirect and systemic risks. So looking at the multiplying effects of losses. And for me, and the work that we've done, and the colleagues from BCG, I think this report quite innovatively brings the real world voices into it. The infrastructure professionals, the private sector, high level decision makers. So that's actually very innovative, and it will add to the discourse. And then finally, also as a technical person like me, it brings that, again, emphasis on technology and MBS as something that is really, something that we need to be paying more attention of, and in the implementation, because they offer such a great opportunity in building that resilient, climate and disaster resilient infrastructure. So that's kind of why I think this report is so great. And then the other question was about the key messages. First of all, the survey that we did, over 3,000 professionals from over 100 countries, as you said, and 77 experts from around the world, told us actually that the capacity gaps are structural. So it's not just about training; it's actually the technical and institutional capacity. Both are key and are quite structural. We just need to be looking at quite deep gaps. Institutions are fragmented. There is no one that owns resilience. Standards need to be updated. So there is quite structural gap that needs to be filled. The other key message from the survey is strengthening policies, standards, regulations is seen as the single most important action that governments need to take. But also the results show that countries and the professionals feel that the current frameworks are inadequate, but also poorly enforced where they exist. So that's kind of like, and this is where I think the engineers play a critical role in updating the standards, making it real for decision makers, and so forth. I'm going a little fast because I know there are many people who need to speak after me, and we don't have a lot of time. I could talk for a lot longer. And then finally, the other key message I want to shine a light on is that despite growing awareness and interest in nature-based solutions and technology, professionals told us that these approaches remain stuck in pilot mode. So, and this is to unlock this, we need to embed this in practice, in standards and guidance, and we need to build a domestic capacity to implement that on the ground. So I'll stop here because I know I don't have a lot more time, but yeah, great to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Savina. And this is a very interesting chapter. It comes up with top 6 messages, but even throughout the chapter, which is somewhere around 25 to 26 pages, you get to see so many other key messages. And also you come across different kind of case studies. So please do read this chapter, and I'm sure you all will kind of get very important messages which will be very relevant in your country context. Let me now move on to Mr. Clothes from Ministry of Transport. As we will see that one of the highlights of the GIL report, it talks about that infrastructure ministries should mainstream the use of risk assessment and cost benefit analysis tools to make infrastructure investments risk informed. And they should also focus on national and sub-national risk assessments to generate more nuanced risk analysis and data. Government of Brazil has already expressed their interest to downscale GIRI at the sub-national level, and we have been working very closely with your government. In the month of May, we did a 3-day long capacity building workshop, which gave us a lot of opportunity to interact with the various stakeholders in your country. We understand you have been already working, some innovative ways you are actually embedding resilience in your infrastructure and also working towards risk assessment. So maybe some reflections from your end on how you have been working on the issue of risk assessment, cost benefit analysis, and embedding resilience. Who would like to introduce?
Clóvis, resumindo a pergunta, ela falou sobre a questão de análise de risco, falou do Brasil, né, que a gente já está tratando disso em contratos de concessão, citou a parceria que a gente teve o workshop lá no Ministério, né, em maio desse ano, e também da nossa intenção de fazer o downscaling do DRI para os estados aqui no Brasil, e tudo isso envolvendo a questão de financiamento. Aí ela pediu para falar sobre como o Brasil está tratando disso.
Vamos por trechos. Primeiro, obrigado pelo convite. O CDRI para a gente no Ministério dos Transportes é uma honra esse estreitamento e ter participado agora desse processo do relatório de 2025, colocando o Brasil como um dos países participantes e nos dando a oportunidade dessa troca de experiência.
First of all, we'd like to thank CDRI and all different institutions here. MOT of Brazil is honored to be a participant of the process of the report, the Global Infrastructure and Resilient Report, and we are happy to take part and be at the report also.
Nossa próxima experiência, nossa próxima ambição é que os estados brasileiros, sobretudo as regiões onde os ativos rodoviários e ferroviários estão em vulnerabilidade em razão do componente climático, sobretudo, conseguir que a metodologia do GIRI seja partilhada com esses estados e, a partir daí, nós possamos fazer um reporte ainda mais robusto em razão das dimensões do Brasil e de como esse dado, essa troca de experiência, pode orientar a atuação dos estados na adaptação da sua infraestrutura de transportes.
Our next ambition is that we use the climate risk analysis GIRI from CDRI for the state roads and rails that are at risk. So we have a more ambitious report, a more detailed report for these regions. And we have a different dimension and different scale for the climate risk analysis. And also the knowledge sharing with CDRI, it will be of extreme importance for this.
A nossa infraestrutura de transportes tem uma característica de ser operada pelo setor privado e nós vivemos o maior ciclo de investimentos da história do Brasil, com a contratação de 40 bilhões de dólares em concessões de rodovias e ferrovias. Se esse número for estendido também às hidrovias e a portos e aeroportos, significa um ciclo de investimento de mais de 60 bilhões de dólares. Uma inovação brasileira foi a contratualização da adaptação e da resiliência na modelagem econômica desses contratos. Os contratos que agora vão ter a duração de 30 anos trazem cláusulas de sustentabilidade e recursos na modelagem econômica, ou seja, o financiamento da adaptação da infraestrutura já está inserido no modelo contratual de concessão brasileira. Isso já significa 4 bilhões de dólares consignados nos contratos para transportes. E já temos exemplos de empresas concessionárias que já mapearam 4.000 trechos para customização, para definição de planos de adaptação da infraestrutura, porquanto um ciclo muito promissor.
In Brazil, we have a different characteristic. Our main infrastructure for transport is maintained by the private sector due to concessions. And in Brazil, we are facing the largest cycle of investment for the transport infrastructure. So we have over 40 billion US dollar already on contracts for PPPs, and also in these contracts there are already the resilience factor included. So we have an investment that is mandatory for the private sector to do for resilience and sustainable infrastructure already on these contracts. And this amount is over $4 billion only for this kind of mandatory use for infrastructure resilience and sustainability. And we already have examples of private sector, the companies that have already 4,000 sections of the road with a climate risk analysis and plans. So they divided the roads in sections to have a very detailed plan for each section. So this is a way to see the implementation of something from national scale to a very small level.
Nossa expectativa é contar com o CDRI para qualificar esse processo brasileiro de adaptação da sua infraestrutura, de construção da resiliência necessária, seja do ponto de vista da capacitação das áreas de governo na relação com os estados, mas também com a adesão da Confederação Nacional dos Transportes, a entidade representativa, e da Coalizão para o Transportes, que reúne uma série de iniciativas privadas, todas focadas nessa perspectiva. Nós entendemos que a adaptação da nossa infraestrutura é um caminho promissor, em razão dos instrumentos definidos para o Brasil. Nós também definimos a taxonomia sustentável brasileira, capaz de alavancar os investimentos privados e do mercado para que a adaptação da infraestrutura aconteça, e nos nossos compromissos setoriais, seja do Plano Clima, seja da Estratégia de Adaptação Brasileira, a parceria com o CDRI para o setor de transportes é essencial, é estrutural e é basilar para antecipar o futuro e avançar ainda mais.
So we are counting on CDRI partnership for a more qualified investment on our infrastructure, for capacity building, also involving the states that we mentioned, and also Clovis mentioned our national confederacy for the transport and the transport coalition, that are the major companies of Brazil are involved in climate change, and the adaptation for Brazil for the infrastructure is promising. And we already have the sustainable taxonomy that for the market, for the investor. And he finished saying about the climate plan. The CDRI partnership and all the other institutions are much important for our plans for the future resilience of the infrastructure.
Objetiva e pragmática. E eu quero agradecer o CDRI por esse apoio de sempre e a nossa expectativa de estreitar ainda mais a nossa parceria. Muito obrigado.
Yeah, we thank CDRI. Our agenda is very objective, and we have to strengthen our partnership. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those very wonderful remarks that you made, Mr. Cloves. There are two very important case studies that we have actually covered in the report from Brazil. One is about the sustainability bonds, and the other is about the work that you have been doing in your transport sector, the levy, the tax that you have levied for embedding resilience. So these two have been captured in the report, and I'm sure there are many more which we can capture. On the DRI again, we have already kind of worked with you in the month of May to come up with a strategy on how to downscale DRI, and we look forward to work further with you. I move on to the third speaker, which is Anika. And with support from BCG, as a part of the report, we did a global survey, a business resilience survey, covering more than 500 businesses spread across 50 countries. And it covered three distinct groups: private infrastructure companies and state-owned enterprises providing infrastructure services. The second group is the large non-infrastructure businesses highly dependent on infrastructure services, and the SMEs. So Anika, I would request you to kind of share few highlights from the findings, the highlights of the chapter, and maybe some 2 to 3 key major findings that you found very relevant. And then maybe I will move on to the second part of my question. But Maybe let me give you the floor to reflect on the first question.
Yes, first of all, congratulations to this excellent report. We're very humbled that we were able to contribute to this report and then especially bring in the business lens we had. As you said, it's the first survey of its kind looking at businesses across the world. 500 companies participated across infrastructure owner, publicly owned companies, large companies. And what I find very striking is also the small and medium companies, because they often get forgotten. And that is, I mean, the backbone of the economy in most of the countries. I also want to add that we focused 6 sectors. The companies were coming from food, chemicals and pharmaceuticals, consumer goods, heavy industries, logistics and real estate. And what I found very striking is that around 80% of the participated companies said that there needs to be more policies in place, clearer policies in place, and also more enforcement in the end, because it doesn't help if you only have the policy and in the end it's not enforced and maybe also controlled and monitored. What I also found very striking is that around 3/4 of the companies said that supply chain is a big topic, and we heard it from the speeches before, that when, for example, an important transport node is disrupted, that you can't get important goods and services in there. I mean, to rebuild in Jamaica, for example. So that is a very important topic, and most of the surveyed companies are aware that it is a topic, but they don't have any practices in place to look at it. And then maybe the last major point I found very striking is about insurance and the importance of insurance. Everyone knows that insurance is important, but more than 40% of the surveyed companies said that they know already that the insurance doesn't cover the total costs or the total damages. So they already see the risk, they see that it could materialize, and they don't have the coverage by the insurance. So very, I would say, also very striking.
Thank you. And Kanika, if I may just ask the second part of the question, which is more on, we have seen that the discourse on ESG with businesses is very mature. But when it comes to resilience, we see that there is an intent, but there is a long way to go. So what, according to you, are the 3 key drivers for businesses to accelerate their action for resilience?
That is a very good question, because I think a good indicator is resilience financing and the amount that is already out there. And we see that it increased over time, but only 5% is still provided by the private sector, which is super striking. And we need to increase this, because in the end, of course, governments can't pay all this by themselves. And businesses have their own interest in increasing their resilience lever. And I see 3 points. The first of one is really protect your own assets, protect your own value chain. And for that, I think it's important to understand the value at risk. So what would I lose if I don't act? Because that really makes it very, very concrete if you put a dollar value out there, summarizing the damage to the infrastructure, and also, that is important, the revenue that is lost if the infrastructure can't be operated. And that summarize it and put a number against it. And then we heard it in the speeches before. There's a big market out there. Obviously, governments won't develop the solutions. Businesses are developing solutions, products and services, and they have to provide that. And businesses want to make business. There's a big market out there, so engage in it. Start to provide the solutions, the ones that are already there and just need to scale, and also invest in development together with governments in order to find innovative solutions. And then in the end, I often get the question about, okay, but what do you do with maybe measures that don't just contribute one business, but more the society at large? And someone has to finance that as well, and that can't be financed by governments. And there you have a lot of PPPs coming into play, where you bring businesses and governments together. And for this, the business case needs to be very, very strong. So what is the return on invest? And I think what is important there to also include co-benefits exist because you implement a resilience measure. Often, for example, at the coast, when you introduce nature-based solutions or things like that, and if you develop a location and that can be used also, and you establish a park where people can go, there's lots of co-benefits that exist when you start to implement solutions that you also need to include in the business case to show a real and very attractive business case.
No, thank you. I think you make, if I summarize, that protect your own assets, build the resilience of your suppliers, and then kind of innovate, and then come forward with innovations to support the resilient infrastructure. This particular report actually provides several case studies which shows the actions taken by different businesses to build resilience of their systems, of their assets, and many other ways that they have. So maybe it's a very good read, particularly this chapter where those case studies are highlighted. Maybe I now move on to the National Secretary from Ministry of Regional Integration and Development, Brazil. My question to you would be on, whenever we talk about resilient infrastructure, the question is who finance it? Where will the finance come from? In this report, we have talked about a layered approach for financing resilience. You are the Secretary of Funds and Financial Investments. So if I may ask you, what are your perspectives on resilience financing? And can you share some of the innovative ways through which government in Brazil is working towards financing resilience?
Well, first of all, good morning to you all. Welcome to Belém. First, as my colleagues said, congrats. This report is not only needed, but it's really welcome. And I think Jamaica spoke for us all, right? We don't have the luxury to rebuild twice. We don't have that. So, Brazil, like other countries around the world, has been facing increasingly extreme climate events with profound human, economic, and environmental impacts. As examples, the floods and droughts in Rio Grande do Sul and the Amazon, landslides in São Paulo and Itajaí Valley, drought in northeastern Pantanal, and now a cyclone in the Paraná. Therefore, it is with a sense of urgency and relevance that we, at the Ministry of Integration and Regional Development, launched the Rebuild with Resilience and Justice Acceleration Plan during COP within the scope of the COP30 Action Agenda. This plan is a result of a joint effort with the Controller General of the Union and the UN DRI, and is aligned with this coalition CDRI. The acceleration plan presents systemic and replicable solutions integrating risk reduction, adaptation, mitigation, resilient reconstruction, and nature-based solutions through coordinated actions. Based on existing experience, it focuses on agile recovery protocols, strengthening of federative governance, transparency, and accountability, implementation of green, blue, and sustainable infrastructure that reduces future risks and restores ecosystems. I thank UNDRR and CDRI for bringing their expertise and practice of supporting countries in disaster risk reduction and the implementation of resilient reconstruction. The current reality is clear. The climate crisis manifests itself in its cruelest form through extreme events, causing often reparable damage during. Okay, and I know we are with a short time, but the plan covers a lot of actions, and we are also working in some new funds. We have a fund especially for rebuilding with resilience. During the G20, we discussed a lot about how we can build better, right? And so for us, we have some challenge in legislation, for example, because our control, the external control, the tribunal of controls, they limited us when we need to rebuild something with a rule, right? We only rebuild as were before. And this is maybe the most challenge that we have right now. It's really good that we are here because, as you said before, and the panel before, it's more expensive to rebuild, it's more expensive to build as we did all the time. So we really need to change, and we have some only not only the new funds, but also a partnership with World Bank, IDB, NDB, and AFD to raise money to finance in this new resilience infrastructure. So we are here today as well as to listen and to learn on how we can advance in a more sustainable way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And CDRI had the privilege to review that document. We provided our inputs, and we look forward to work with your government in advancing the agenda for resilient recovery. This report actually talks about one of the key messages of this report is recovery readiness and faster reconstruction can actually help government to reduce the impact of disaster damage and losses on their GDP. So, and we have run a model, which I think Ede mentioned during his presentation. We looked at 8 countries and did some analysis. I'm sure you will find those analyses very interesting. Let me move on to the last speaker of the session, and that is Ede. Ede, we have been hearing from several times, we heard today during the session from the high-level speakers as well as today that resilience is everyone's business. And then we need to actually work with a large number of stakeholders when we talk about building resilience of infrastructure. Our governance report chapter in the report has dealt in great detail on how do we work through a whole of society and a whole of government approach, and how do we bring all the relevant stakeholders together. And we have also actually crafted 9 memos which actually gives very pointed direction to each of these relevant stakeholders. So over to you to share with us some of the top messages emerging from the governance chapter.
Thank you, Ranjini. And 2-3 important messages that come out of that analysis of institutions and governance. Because it's not only financing, it's not only standards, it's not only the engineering side. At the core is people who are making infrastructure resilience. So the first message was, look, resilient infrastructure is not just the business of infrastructure agencies. They have a critical role. They are at the center of making this change, but alone they cannot do it. So, for example, you were mentioning that the legislation is not letting you build back better, and therefore the role of legislators is a critical one, and we begin to analyze what is it that they need to do to help infrastructure agencies get better on resilience. What is the role of the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Planning? But also agencies that you sometimes don't think about. The agency in charge of land administration and management and planning is critical. Infrastructure itself needs enough land to be able to work with nature to get those resilient services for that. The land administration doesn't work with agencies, it doesn't. So what we try to do is that, look, there's a series of very practical actions that the different government agencies need to take to help infrastructure agencies become more resilient. But second, that is not enough. The infrastructure agencies also serve the people of the country. And therefore, how do you, in very practical ways, define measures by which the infrastructure agency helps their users, the businesses that depend on those infrastructure services, the communities that work with them, so that they are also resilient. At some point, some of the infrastructure assets are going to be overwhelmed by disasters. And therefore, the business that is trying to get the supplies or that is trying to move its products to markets need to know where are the failures of those infrastructures and what are the alternative means to get there. The users need to understand how long is it going to be the power outage after the disaster so that they can take measures at their own to be able to handle that shock to the family, to the kids that are studying, to the transportation that they need to a hospital. So those partnerships really to the users are not only important because resilience is not just the resilience of the asset, it's resilience of the user. And finally, the third message that we say is that, look, the capacity of all of these agencies to be better at resilience depends on the human capital. Therefore, what is the role of the professional associations and the university system to begin to build that capacity and to have an ecosystem of experts that are able to serve the public sector, the private sector, the finance minister, the legislators, to understand and do all the analysis that we're talking about here. And therefore coming and saying it is the academic sector as the professional associations that really need to lift that capacity in that process. It's not just the infrastructure agencies doing that. You need a lot of experts on infrastructure risk, a lot of experts on NATO-based solutions for resilience, a lot of experts on business continuity services, a lot of really professionals that move in that direction. So those are the three important messages out of the institutions and governance report that we want to bring forward.
Thank you. Raina just told me we have 3 more minutes, and I wish we could have got some more time because we couldn't touch upon the theme of technology and nature-based solution. The report also provides very strong analysis, data, and evidence on both these 2 themes as well. So this report is rich in data. It provides several policy recommendations. It provides evidence by capturing more than 75 case studies from across the world. And what it does, it actually helps various stakeholders to understand what are the different actions that they can take by providing tools, frameworks, and guidance. With this, maybe we come to an closure of this panel discussion. It was an absolute pleasure for me to moderate this, and I thank once again all our panelists for their time and for their excellent interventions. Thank you. Thank you very much. We would like to do another photo op. So